So we are learning for the Menucha of Sir Naim Dangur and Sir Moshe Montefiore. We're finishing this series on Havdalah that began in the previous unit, Unit 31. As I said, we got through the bracha of Havdalah, through the bracha bar Gefen, or Shakol Yabidvaro, if you're doing Havdalah on something else. Boremine Besamim, or possibly Atzei or Isbei Besamim. And we also learned about whether someone who has corona and can't smell anything could say Boremine Besamim, right? That was an issue. And now we're going to move on to the issue of fire. So the Midrash says the following. Where's this idea of making a bracha on fire, Motzei Shabbat, where does it come from? So the Midrash says as follows: Rabbi Levi b'shem Rabbi Zeira Amal 36 שעות שימשה אותה האורה, 12 של שבת, 12 של ערב שבת, 12 של ליל שבת ו12 של שבת. כיוון ששקעה החמה במוצאי שבת, התחיל החושך ממשמש ובא. Now, this is a very interesting thing. I've always wondered about this. The first time Adam Rishon fell asleep, what do you think was going on? Right? When you're a baby, I guess you don't realize much, right? You don't really understand that, and you just get used to it, and you realize that this is what we do. We fall asleep at one point. But the first time Adam Rishon goes to sleep, it's a scary thing. It's like I'm falling apart. I don't know if I'm ever going to get out of this. Now, the Midrash says more than that. The Midrash says Adam Rishon is born on Friday, and then the sun stayed out for 36 hours, and then started setting. And then they say, what do I do now? Nitira Adam Rishon. Sorry, Nitira Adam Rishon. שנאמר ואומר חושך ישופני ולילה אור בעדני. אותו שכתוב בו הוא ישופך ראש ואתה תשופנו עקב, בא להזדווג לי. Right? החושך ישופני, the Midrash says, has to do with ישופך ראש, that was said about the snake, right? So חושך ישופני has to do with the snake, the fear of the snake. In general, it's an interesting thing that this seeped into general literature. In general literature, the idea of the snake that could come, that's always in the shadows, that's always lurking there, that will show up if you're not in control. That snake, that serpent, will take over, right? This comes from Adam Rishon, comes from this midrash. Ma'asa Kadosh Baruch Hu zimen lo shnei re'afim, hikisha 2 stones, hikishan ze leze v'yatza mein or uvirech aleha. It's fire, ur, uverech aleh. Hadaud dichtiv, ve'layla or ba'adeni. Where does he get Laila or? Since when is Laila or, right? So Midrash says, at that first night, he created fire. Ma'birech aleh bore meorei ha'esh. At yeke Shmuel, Damar Shmuel, mipnei ha'mavarchin ala ur b'motzei Shabbat. Ur, by the way, the reason I'm pronouncing it ur, not or is fire. Right? Or is light, Ur is fire. So essentially, we're having a birthday every week. We celebrate the fire's birthday, right? Literally the day it was born, right? Motzei Shabbat. Rav Huna b'shem Rav v'Rabbi Abahu b'shem Rabbi Yochanan amar af motzei yom kippurim mevarchin alav mipnei sheshavat ha'ur kol oto hayom. Shabbat and Yom Kippur are unique in that you can't use fire. On Yom Tov, you can use fire to cook. Shabbat and Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to cook actively. I'm not going to repeat everything we learned about cooking on Shabbos now, but you can't create the fire and you can't pass it on. You can't extend it. That's for sure, right? And you can't use it for cooking, at least not in a normal way, in a regular way. So because it took that break, you make a new bracha. Now, so first of all, the very idea that you're going to make a bracha on the birthday of something, you might, if you eat, right? So if you eat chickens on Thursday, you should celebrate the chicken's birthday, right? Because when chickens were created, right? I'm not getting mixed up here, right? So, right? It's a bit of a strange idea. We're going to see later on. We're going to see a bit more about this. Now, you could argue, and I think the simple pshat in the midrash is, fire is the first thing that allows us to create new things. Not only that, it's also the first thing that we created. So fire has two aspects to it, two unique aspects in their creation. First of all, they weren't created in the first 7 days of the world, right? You had the 6 days of creation, the seventh day in which this idea of Shabbat was created, whatever that means. I mean, we can say a lot about that. I don't want to get bogged down into that right now. But fire was not created during the 7 days of creation. Now, you'll say, it was part of the world, the human ability to create fire and to control it. That's what changed. Right, exactly. That's the birthday seems to have more to do with our ability to create, which we then achieve after Shabbat, which is true anyway, right? The Shabbat, we don't create. The first human creation, and this I saw in Yuval Noah Harari's book. He has this argument. I saw it in other places too. The argument that would make humans unique is their control of fire. And that's an interesting idea, because if I'm saying this from a very atheistic point of view, right? So Kal V'chomer, if we have the Midrash that tells us, yeah, that's the first human creation. What's needed, you need to protect yourself. And the first way of doing that is by having fire. And that's why Adam Arishon said, Bore Morei Hesh, and that's why every week we repeat Bore Morei Hesh. We'll go a bit deeper into this idea later on, but just want to start with that. So the Midrash, ultimately, if we want to sum this up, says two things. First of all, it's the fire's birthday. Why is that a reason for celebration, for a bracha? We'll go deeper in later on, but I started the discussion already. And the other aspect here is that you couldn't use it during Shabbat, you couldn't use it during Yom Kippur, and that's why you make the bracha on it, Motzei Shabbat, Motzei Yom Kippur. That's what this Midrash seems to be saying. So the Rashba, interesting thing is that the Rashba, someone asks him this question, which is brilliant. The question is brilliant. מה ראו חכמים לברך על האור במוצאי שבת מטעם שהיה תחילת בריאתו יותר משאר בריאות? זה ביום פלוני וזה ביום פלוני. אולי לפי שבריאת האש הייתה על ידי אדם ויבוא אדם ויברך עליו מה שאין כן בשאר הבריאות. So the person who asked the question was a big Talmid Chacham himself and said, he wasn't asking the Rashba, I have no idea. He's saying, is this the reason? It seems to me that the difference between the fire and everything else is that the fire was created by humans, and that was the first thing humans created, and that's why it merits its bracha for its birth on its birthday. Right? We're celebrating. Let's read the Rashba's answer first, and then I want to say something about the connection between the question and the answer. So the Rashba yesh ta'am tov mize. לפי שנאסר בשבת וכל מוצאי שבת חזר להתרו, כאילו נתחדש עתה. משום כך מברכים עליו אף במוצאי יום הכיפורים, מפני שביום זה נאסר ועתה הותר, וכאילו נתחדש עתה. So it's interesting that the person who asked the question sounds more like the first reason in the Midrash, and the Rashba says, no. The real reason is the second reason in the Midrash. But Rav Soloveitchik connects these two and says that they're not mutually exclusive, they actually complete each other. What happens is this. You can't use the fire on Shabbat, you can't create on Shabbat, and fire is the most essential creation. That's the basic creation. You have fire, then you can start creating tools, then you can start doing things. You can really control things when you control fire. And that's the first thing that man ever created. Every Shabbat, we stop our creation completely. And then we go back into the world in which we create, Sheshet Yemei HaMaaseh. We go back into there, and the first thing we do is we celebrate the human ability to create in the world, and we celebrate Hashem giving us this ability to be outside of Shabbat and create, and then go back into Shabbat, and then go out of Shabbat again, and then back in. And that's the celebration of fire is through that. Now, when we look at these two reasons, I mean, you can look at them in the Rashba too, because they seem to coincide with two reasons in the Midrash as well. So the person who's asking the question, the first reason in the Midrash, sounds more like I'm thanking Hashem, I'd say a shevach, right? I'm just trying to think of what would be the right word in English for that. It sounds more like a shevach, right? I'm saying to Hashem, thank you for creating fire that we could control. Thank you for giving us this unique ability. Yeah, so we're praising Hashem for his giving us the fire and for being able to create. right? Now, when the Rashba says you can't use it on Shabbos, then use it again, that's very reminiscent of what? It's like other brachot. The Gemara in Masal Brachot says that, of course, you have to make a bracha before you enjoy the world, because you can't enjoy the world without making a bracha first, right? Hashem gave you a world. Before you use it, before you eat, before you drink, before you smell, right? You have to make a bracha. So you had fire. You couldn't use it on Shabbat, right? So if you ate and then you stopped eating and then you eat again, you have to make a new bracha, right? The Rashba says you couldn't use the fire on Shabbat. Now you could use it again. You have to make a new bracha. Right, so you can almost say that the first reason the Midrash has more to do with praise, and the Rashba's reason, the second reason the Midrash, is more like a matir. A matir to go out to the world and use fire, you have to make this bracha. We're going to see a few ramifications of this distinction. So the Kolbo says, "Kivan sheberech alav b'motzei Shabbat, shuv ein tzarich levarech alav kol hashavua." See the phrasing, right? Already here, even we'll see, he says it more explicitly later on. But already at this point, you see, he says, the matir of using fire all week is that you made that first bracha Motzei Shabbat. Then you could use it the rest of the week. You don't have to worry, make a new bracha. Just like we say, right? You have a drink and you're still sitting, so you could have another drink, right? The question is always, you're on the go, you go on a tiyul, and you start and you have a sip of water, and you know you're going to be drinking every 10 minutes. Do you have to make a new bracha, right? Those are always the discussion. Same idea. You make that first bracha, Motzei Shabbat, you don't have to make a new bracha on the fire the rest of the week. So already you hear this sounds like other kinds of birkot ne'anin, right? There's not a bracha of praise, right? That's not the point. I mean, praise Hashem for giving us everything. But the essence of the bracha that is a matir to use the fire. That's what he says explicitly here. לפי שאין הפסק להנאתו, שכל היום הוא צריך לאפות, לבשל בו, להתחמם כנגדו, כיוון שכן האדם מסיח דעתו ממנו. So again, all the wording here is all taken from the world of Birkot HaNe'anin. Right? The Hesech HaDat, did I stop? Right? So we never really stop using fire, right? The poskim would say, use electricity. There's always fire underlying that, right? The fire is always there in the background somewhere. So you're always kind of using, and that's why only on Shabbos that you're not allowed to create it, you're not allowed to pass it on, you're allowed to move it, then you make a new bracha. But otherwise you don't. The Ramban says, is opposed to this idea, says the exact opposite. You go to sleep at night, you wake up in the morning. So let's say you don't have a fireplace, you don't have the fire on, right? You have your pajamas, you have your blanket, you don't need the heat. Right? So you wake up in the morning, you had a nice break from the fire, you should make a new bracha, right? That's the Ramban's point. So the question is, why not, right? Why? Truly, if I quoted the Gemara in Brachos earlier, the Gemara in Brachos says you're not allowed to enjoy the world if you don't have to get pleasure from the world, if you don't get benefits from the world without making a bracha. So why don't you make a bracha on that kind of bracha on the fire? So the Kolbo says, yeah, you should. Now you make it once a week, because then the rest of the week just follows that. The Ramban says, in that case, you'd have to make it every morning, at least. So why not? שלא תקנו ברכה בהנאות שאינן נכנסות לגוף, כגון רחיצת מים חמים וקרים וחמים, כגון נשבה הרוח ונהנה, וכל שכן ביאור שאינו נוגע בגוף כלל. לא אמרו אלא בדברים נכנסים לגוף והגוף נהנה מהם, כגון אכילה ושתייה, וריח נע מדבר נכנס לגוף וסועד הוא כאכילה ושתייה דמי, בברכת האור כברכה של יוצר המאורות, ושתיהן ברכת השבח. So explicitly says it's a bracha of shevach. And why not? Because you only make birkot nehenin on things that actually enter the body. So interesting point about smell, right? Smell, we know that you have to have particles have to enter your body, otherwise you don't smell, right? And there's interesting machloket about that between the Ramban and Baal HaMaor in Chulin. Yaakov might remember this. Who else was with us? Just one second. Everyone remember this? In Chulin, there's a machloket in the Ramban and Baal HaMaor. Is smell particles or not? Right? It's an interesting idea. Is it smell particles or just like this, I don't know, thing? Not so clear what he means by that, but the Ramban says that when you smell something, actual particles must be entering your body. Otherwise, you're not. What's happening there? Says all of Birkot HaNe'anim are things that enter your body. You have a good shower, right? You go into a sauna, you go into a jacuzzi. Why don't you make a bracha? Because it doesn't enter the body. That's same goes for fire, right? Same idea. He says goes for fire, and that's why you don't. That's why it's a bracha, it's a birkat shevach. It's a birkat shevach, not birkat HaNe'anim. You're praising Hashem for what He gave us, but you're not. But it's not the same kind of pleasure. So this idea. So this Gemara in Brachot Daf Nun Gimel we saw earlier in the context of, we brought it as the Kal V'chomer about Besamim. Rav Yehuda Amar Rav en mechazon el ha'ur k'derech shemechazon el ha'mitzvot, meaning you should do it, but it's not as much of a mitzvah as davening with the minyan. It's not much of a mitzvah as doing other things. The Ramban says, why not? In mechazrin al ha'ur k'derech shemechazon el ha'mitzvot, ela kashem she'en mechazrin el brikat ha'shevach. Right? I'm sure at least two of you have been to Niagara Falls. At least two of you, right? Now you go to Niagara Falls, you make I don't even remember. But the point is, you make there are many brachot hashevach. The Mishnah and the Gemara and brachot Perek Tet has a whole list of brachot you should make when you see the biggest trees in the world and the biggest waterfalls, etc. How much do you have to go out of your way to make sure you go to Niagara Falls? It's a good thing to do, and praise Hashem and see amazing things that He could create. But is it a mitzvah you have to spend a lot of money and time and money to do? Yeah, if you want to enjoy it, sure, but you don't have to do it. Says the Ramban, by the same token, you should praise Hashem for this fire, but beseder if you can, so don't. You don't have to go too far out of your way. The Rosh goes even further with the first idea, right? This, as I said, the Ramban seems to follow more of the first idea in the Midrash, right? Not that you took a break on Shabbat and then went back to the fire on Motzei Shabbat, right? But the first reason the Midrash has to do with the fire's birthday. The Rosh sees it truly as a birthday, strictly as a birthday, and therefore it's not. There's no reason you should go too far out of your way. He says, right? Same idea the Ramban said before. Why don't you at least make a bracha on the fire every morning, or every time you break from using fire? So you see. So what is it? So the Ramban says Birkat Shevach. The Rosh says it isn't even a regular Birkat Shevach. It's more of a happy birthday, kind of. So how far do you have to go for that? That's the Rosh. Now, the more interesting thing that based on the Kolbo takes this further. It says like this. This year I know it comes out the other way around. Whoever here is in Yerushalayim. This year, we're all going to read Megillah on Friday. Wherever you are in the world, you're going to read Megillah on Friday. But Purim could come out Motzei Shabbat. What do? You read the Megillah right after Shabbat. Now, when I say right after Shabbat, what about Havdalah? You have to make Havdalah first. You don't have to make Havdalah first. The Kolbo says, Purim shechalet b'Motzei Shabbat shekorin Megillah le'or haner mevarech Bore Maori ha'esh kodem. If we say it's Birkat HaNe'anim, you have to have a matir to use the fire, Motzei Shabbat. You're going to read the Megillah. You're going to have to read the Megillah out of the klaf, out of the Megillah, out of the physical scroll. So you're going to need fire. You're going to need light. What gives you the right to use this light? Every Motzei Shabbat, you have to make a bracha before you use the light. So for Ma'ariv, it's part of Havdalah, it's fine. But once you're done with that, once you're done with Ma'ariv, now you're doing the Sunday mitzvah, right? Sunday, if Purim comes out on Sunday. The Sunday mitzvah, that's already a new thing. So you shouldn't make a bracha. So you shouldn't be allowed to use the fire until you make the bracha.
That's what we do on Tisha B'Av. Also, on
right.
Tisha B'Av we say Bore Maori ha'esh before Echa.
Right. So I'll say something about that in a moment. So, I'll say it now. I think the reason we accept that ruling there is because you're not going to be doing another proper Havdalah afterwards. And you can't have the Besamim. So the fire really does have its own very separate stance, right? You can't make Bor Pragefen. You can't do Or Shakol, right? Because it's Tisha B'Av. you're not going to do Morenu B'Samim because the whole point is Nachzir to Neshama, right? As we said, and that's kind of not what you want to do on Tisha B'Av, right? You do want to be upset on Tisha B'Av. So you're not going to do any of those things. So the fire just ends up on its own. So you say, let's just do that now. Won't necessarily be the same. I'm only saying that because it won't necessarily be the same ruling as we'll have on Purim, let's say Shabbat, right? Where we are going to have a lot of Ber Geffen on Purim, right? יש חולקים ואומרים שאינו צריך לברך עליו לפי שכבר נפטר ביוצר המאורות. אמנם תמיד מסתבר הוא שלא ייהנה ממנו בלא ברכה. So it's an interesting idea that he says, when you said יוצר המאורות, now when you say יוצר המאורות, Shachris, that morning. All right. Right? Those admirers, you're not saying the same, you say a different kind of bracha, right? Mariv Ravim, right? We're talking about the moving into darkness, right? Not creating light. But he says it's good enough. And but his bottom line seems to be, so he says, I see the svara again. He doesn't, what would the Ramban say? What would the Rosh say? The Ramban and the Rosh would say, it's a bracha of Shevach, so he'll say Shevach later. So say, praise Hashem through the Megillah, and then praise Hashem by the fire later on. It's not so important to stop davening in the middle and do that, right? The Kolbo doesn't even raise that svara. He says, I see two options. Either you have to make the bracha first, or maybe you're yotze with a different bracha. Fine. But only one of those, right? Yeah, Yaakov?
I just want to say it's interesting that even Yotzer Meorot now we saw kind of a machloket about what its nature is too, because I believe the Ramban mentioned it before as an example of, right, this is a Birkat HaShevach, just like Yotzer Meorot, and the Kobo seems to be saying, this is a Birkat HaNe'anin, just like Yotzer Meorot. I don't know, now I'm thinking about, like, maybe if you're supposed to daven Vatikin, then you say Yotzer Meorot, just as like it's starting to be light outside, you also like say it right.
It's kind of matir.
As you're starting to get benefit from light at the beginning of the day.
Right, Yefeh. That's nice. Though, right, you can't say Yotzer Meorot until Mishiakir et Chavero, right? Right, so right, so it's saying just then, that's exactly when, right? That's exactly the way to do it, right? You start recognizing people, then make the bracha. The Maharash has a different explanation for this idea of Yotzer Meorot, right? The Maharash has a different explanation. I think it's closer to what Yaakov was saying. Not exactly, but closer. מה שכתב, בכל בו, לפי שכבר נפטר ביוצר המאורות, הכי כאמר, פני שאין ברכה זו מיוחדת מצד שאסור ליהנות מן הנר בלא ברכה, כברכת הנהנין, לפי שכבר נפטר הנעת הנר בברכת יוצר המאורות, שבה נכלל אור הנר. כן, חיובה במוצאי שבת, אינו לזכר למה שאירע לאדם הראשון. וכן הוא כבר יכול לברכה אחר כך. Meaning, when you say, כבר נפטר ביוצר המאורות, you don't mean, wow, we say a whole bunch of birkot hanehenin that are matirin, right? What is matir using the fire? Well, every morning you say Yotzer Meorot, and once a week you also say B'rei Merohesh. Right, these are a bunch of different reasons for doing that, right? He said, a bunch of different solutions for that allow me, a bunch of different material. He says, the fact that you say Yotzer Meorot every morning, he kind of turns the whole thing over. It says, you say Yotzer Meorot every morning, what does that do? That's matter using the light of day, which includes fire, because we know that the sun is also just like a very big fire, right? Ultimately, in a sense, right? So you're matir that every morning. So there's nothing unique about Bore or Hesh. Mimele, the Rosh is right. If you use this matir of Yotzer Meorot every morning, why do you have to use a special one, Motzei Shabbat? Why not this evening? Did we all say Yotzer Meorot this morning? Let's assume we all said Yotzer Meorot this morning. Are we using fire now based on what matir? This morning's Yotzer Meorot. It'll work until tomorrow morning, and then we'll say it again, right? So this undermines the Kolbo's whole idea. It's not just, well, you have a matir every morning, and Motzei Shabbat you have another extra matir should you, Leinyan Megillah, somech on the morning's matir, or I use the extra one that you use every week? That's not the question. It's deeper than that. When you say meaning I already did the matir that allows me to use the fire Motzei Shabbat, that means that Birkat Bora Ha'esh isn't the matir either, at all, ever. Every week it can't be the matir, because if you could use the Yotzer Me'orot Motzei Shabbat that happens to be Purim as a matir, you could use it every single week as well. So why do you need it at all? It must be that the Rosh is right. You see, so this idea it's not only, right, the Kol presented it as well, I have a bunch of material. So you could matir by saying Yotzer Me'orot, you could matir by saying Bora Moresh. So what should I do Motzei Shabbos? I'm not sure. All right, good question. So, but really, we're on the same. We're thinking in the same. We're on the same wavelength, right? We're agreeing that Bora Moresh is a matir. The question is only, do I have another matir I could samech on? Marash Levi says no. It undermines your whole argument, because it means that every single week, every single day, you have Yotzer Me'orot, and you can use the fire based on that. So nothing special happens Motzei Shabbat. So why do you make the bracha Motzei Shabbat? What is special about Motzei Shabbat? It must be that it's not a Birkat Hanenin at all. Lemai said the Rama, the Rama says, in the good old days in Ashkenaz when everyone said Veiten Lecha in shul. After Krat Megillah, Keger says, right, so what happens if, and I've seen this in the shul, where right after Ma'ariv in the winter, right, Ma'ariv is Motzei Shabbat, it's early, it's 5:15, right, it's 5:30, no one's in a rush, no one's really hungry, right, on a regular day, you don't get home at 6 o'clock, right, so everyone sits down for Daf Yomi after Ma'ariv, before Havdalah. Is that okay? Or should you say at least to Bora Moresh? So Kiveger says, he says, look, the best thing to do is to make Havdalah and say the whole thing. You shouldn't push off Havdalah Stam, right? We saw this already in the previous unit, that you should, right after Ma'ariv, you should move on and do the Havdalah right away. That's Chol Mikre. But he doesn't accept the Kolbo's idea that what happens if you don't have the cup? Should you say Bora Moresh just as a matir? That he disagrees. He knows the Kolbo is there. He says, but he disagrees. It says, Lemaise, we see the right thing to do is to really do it the way Chazal said, so he disagrees with the Kolbo, again, based on the idea and the Ramban and the Rosh. Okay, we asked earlier, someone who had corona and can't smell, could he say Borei Minei B'Samim to be motzi others? Similar question comes up about Borei Morei Ha'esh. Right? We say the same thing about Borei Morei Ha'esh. Once again, presumably, we'd say the following. If it's a Shevach that's part of Havdalah, so maybe I could be motzi others. If it's Birkat Hanenin, so I was matir for myself. It's better that the person I'm being motzi will make his own bracha, right? Again, presumably, I wouldn't say, I know it's not necessarily so clear cut, the connection there, but I think there is the directionally correct, I'd say. Says the Birkei Yosef, מי שכבר בירך בורא מאורי האש, יכול לחזור ולברך להוציא בני ביתו. אפילו רבנו אפרים, the palig b'besamim, right? Remember in Rabbeinu Ephraim? Remember, he said, if you can't smell Rabbeinu Ephraim who had corona or something, other illness that didn't allow him to smell, right? רבנו אפרים, the palig b'besamim, היינו משום שאינו מצווה ועיקרו להנאת הנפש. אבל בנר דיו מצווה, מודד יכול לחזור ולברך להוציא בני ביתו. So when it comes to the fire, it's a mitzvah, right? But Shulchan Aruch disagrees. יש חולקים על זה ואומרים, שאף שלא נתקנה בשביל הנעת האדם, מכל מקום הועיל ואינו צריך לחזר אחר האור, לברך עליו במוצאי שבת, כדרך שצריך לחזר אחר כל המצוות שאין חובה. לפיכך, אין ברכה זו דומה לברכת המצוות, שמפני שאין חובה יכול לברך אותן מי שיצא כבר ידי חובתו, כדי להוציא אחרים שלא יצאו עדיין ידי חובתם. וטוב וחוש את דבריהם שלא כן תסרק ברכה לבטלה. So he says like this, he says, when you do a mitzvah that you have to do, then you could motzi other people by making the bracha for them. But if it's a mitzvah that Chazal said, do it if it's there. So if you already yotze, you can't motzi others. Now he isn't sure about this. He ends up saying bracha. He says sfek bracha levatala. He isn't certain that this is necessarily so. He's aware of the Birkei Yosef who says, this is part of the text of Havdalah, and you can say the entire text to be motzi someone else. But he ends up saying it's better mitzad safek. It's better you don't have bracha levatala on your hands. It's better that the person you're being motzi will make the bracha for himself, based on the same ideas. That's Chazon Ish reads this. בברכת המאור, אף על גב, כשיש לו נר חייב לברך עליו, מכל מקום לא שייך ערבות בזלמך של ברכת המצוות. Right? לא שייך ערבות, the idea is exactly that. Right? The idea is, if we have a chiyuv, right? So if Yaakov has a chiyuv to Yotzei, Borem, or Hesh, so I have a chiyuv that Yaakov will be a Yotzei, Borem, or Hesh. That's what Arvut means, right? Arvut means that it's not only your responsibility, it's my responsibility as well. That's what the concept of Arvut means. When it comes to something, if Yaakov isn't really chayav, so I'm not really chayav either. If someone has an obligation, and I'm a signator, is that the right word? Right, I'm also signed on that. It's my responsibility as well. So I can make the bracha because it's my responsibility as well. But if he isn't really chayav, so it's not really my responsibility. So again, I think I can propose there's a connection between this question of being motzi others and the question of once you yotze already, and the questions we said about shevach and shevach as opposed to hana'ah, Rebekat Ne'anin, but Shulchan Acharav and the Chazon Ish connected more to the idea of arevut and say, since you don't have an arevut regarding something you're not really chayav in, so you can't be motzi others. Now, the big question is, what about it seems that the biggest raya the Ramban and the Rosh have, right? The Ramban, the Rosh said it's not a Birkat HaNe'anin, it's a Birkat HaShevach. Now, we know, right, many times, I don't know, when you see a Shevach, right? When you see something you make a Birkat HaShevach on, right? You go out you want to look outside to see the lightning. So do you make the bracha and then look for the lightning, or do you see the lightning and then make the bracha? Right, first you see and then you make the bracha, right? Why? Because not bracha on the hana'ah. It's not that I'm enjoying seeing it. It's that I'm praising Hashem, and first I have to see what I'm praising Him for. David, you want to point something out? Okay. So the Mishnah in Brachot says, "In mevarchin l'nerad sheyotu le'oro." The question is, what does that mean exactly? The pashtut, the sentence seems to mean that until you enjoy it, right, until you see with that fire, with that light, you can't make the bracha. But the Gemara plays around with this concept. Amar v'yuda amarav, lo yarotu yotu mamash, ela kol shilu omed bekarov u'mishtamesh le'ora, ve'afilu berichuk makom. So, what does that mean exactly? It sounds like you don't have to see, right? We always, the minhag, right? To look at your nails to see, right? You're looking for the dirt in your nails. So it's a true use of the fire. What happens but he's saying you stand across the living room from the fire, and kol she'ilu omed bekarov u'mishtamesh le'ora. If the fire could be used, then you could make a bracha on it, right? that sounds a lot more like Birkat HaShevach, right? It's not Birkat HaNe'in. Birkat HaNe'in has to be something I use actively. He's saying the fire has to be fire that's useful. So the idea of Yo'otu Le'oro is something that has potential of gaining that benefit from. Not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to gain that benefit, right? The Mishnah said that Yo'otu Le'oro, which sounds like you have to actually get pleasure out of the fire. But Rav says, if you were close enough, you would. We'll see this in Rashi in a moment. I first want to see Rava says Yo'otu Mamash. Rava disagrees, says, I don't know why you're playing games. Yo'otu means Yo'otu. The Kama, okay, presumably, how do you define Yo'otu, right? Or, Kol Shilu Omed B'Kol V'Mishtamesh Le'ora, right? He said the fire has to be useful. How useful? So presumably this question, Kama, is really a question, could really be understood as a question on both, right? Rav says, it's Machlokes Rav and Rava, right? Rav says, the fire, when I say Yo'otu Le'oro, that's defining the fire, the criteria, how good a fire does it need to be. Rava says, no, it's a criteria in your own use. And I say the Kama could really refer to either one. Refer to how effective, what is the quality of the fire? It could also be, what is the quality of my use, right? Kama is a qualitative question in this context, right? Because it's a quantitative, but quantity of, right, the quality I have from the fire, right? Amar כדי שיכיר בניסה לפונדיון, חזקיה אמר כדי שיכיר מלוזמה של טבריה למלוזמה של ציפורי. Of course, now we're in trouble because I don't think I know how to differentiate between that meluzma and that meluzma, even if they're right in front of me in broad daylight. But the idea here seems to be that the fire has to be fire either, right, you have two different coins and you can differentiate between them, or you have coins that are actually quite similar, but you can discern the difference. But see how Rashi explains. So, lo yo'otu mamash afilu lo ne'ena mimenu mevarchin alav u'mayad she'otu ad she'ir'uro ra'ui le'enot mimenu lo omdim samuch lo ve'az mevarchin alav afilu rechokim u'bilvad she'ir'uhu. So again, if they light the fire in next room, right? They light the fire in the next room and you know it's there, you can't make a bracha because you have to see it. But if you're in a crowd, and this happens many times, there used to be this thing called a hotel. If you guys remember. Once upon a time, you go to a hotel for Shabbos, and then Motzei Shabbos, you all meet in the lobby, and you make Havdalah, and you have 300 people, and you have one fire, and so David's saying, well, there were bidud hotels. So before that, there were actually actual hotels, but and you have 300 people, and you have one Havdalah candle, and you're all you can't convince the hotel to turn their lights off properly either, right? To say I see the fire and those who are around it. So as I said, the Yo'otu is a definition of how effective the fire is, right? The quality of the fire, not how close you are, as opposed to Yo'otu mamash omed b'samuch. Now, this Omed B'Samuch I actually found very, very interesting. Why does Rashi need to explain Omed B'Samuch? Isn't Yo'otu Mamash just Yo'otu Mamash? So you need to enjoy the fire. Presumably, I'd propose, before Rashi, that Rav follows the concept of the Ramban and the Rosh and says, it's a Shevach. I see fire, I see people getting benefit out of it, just like I see Niagara Falls from a mile away, right? How close do you stand to Niagara Falls that you can actually see it properly, right? You stand a few hundred meters away, right? I was never there just because all the coals are here, so I keep on mentioning it. But right, you stand far away and you see it, right? And you say, wow, right? You don't have to, brush against it. You just see it and say, wow, Hashem, amazing, right? Same goes for the fire, right? I can stand on the other side of the hotel lobby and I say, wow, I'm not getting any benefit out of it, but that makes no difference according to the Ramban and the Rosh, presumably. And when Rava says Yo'otu mamash, that sounds more like the kolbo, right? He says, no, you need to actually get benefit out of the fire. That's the point of the bracha. Now, when Rashi explains Omed B'Samuch, why do you have to explain Omed B'Samuch? Just say Yotu Mamash means Yotu Mamash. You have to get benefit out of the fire. That's it. I think Rashi's saying, let's read the previous Rashi again. Right? Those who are near could benefit out of the fire. Is there anyone near the fire? Maybe not. Maybe they put the fire on the table in the middle of the lobby, and everyone's standing in a big circle. No one is close to the fire. No one's getting any benefit out of the fire, and everyone's just saying, "Wow, this is amazing!" Right? And that's the bracha. So no one needs to actually benefit according to Rav, right? According to Rava, possibly not either. According to Rava, Ra'ui le'enot la'omdim samuch, or do you need to be the guy who is actually omed samuch? Now, do you have to actually use the fire, or do you just have to have the potential of using the fire? If Rashi means to say that you need to get pleasure out of it, why does he have to tell me where you're standing? Depends on how effective the fire is, right? Why is he telling me you have to stand nearby? Why say that? Just say, if you could discern the 2 coins, you could discern the 2 coins, or take 2 coins and discern them, or put your fingernails out and to distinguish between the 2 coins. If you look at your fingernails and find the dirt under the nails, right? Why is Rashi saying you have to stand nearby? I think it's connected to the previous standing nearby. Or do you have to be the guy who's omed samuch? Does anyone ever have to benefit out of it? I think not. I think Rashi's point is to turn also Rava, right? So this is astonishing because the Mishnah says, I just want you to understand the process that I'm seeing here. The Mishnah says you have to enjoy. Rav says, you don't really have to enjoy. There has to be potential in the fire to enjoy. Rava says, no, you really have to enjoy. Rashi says, when he says you really have to enjoy, he means you have to be in a place where you could really enjoy. So even when Rava tries to go back to the original understanding in the Mishnah and say, I mean really enjoy, Rashi says, he doesn't mean you really have to enjoy the fire. Because why would you have to do that? We're not the kolbo here. Only the kolbo things you have to actually enjoy the fire. But we're with the Rosh, with the Ramban, the mainstream Rishonim say you don't need to enjoy the fire. There has to be a fire. You have to say, wow. Now again, you could say, I stand across the hall, across the lobby and enjoy it from there, or I stand nearby and appreciate it, right? Stand across the lobby and appreciate it from there, stand nearby because here I'm in the place where I can actually use it. But you actually need to use it? There's no reason to think you should. I think I might be reading a bit too deeply into this Rashi, but I'm convinced that's what he's doing here. Let's see the Meiri. אין מברכין על הנר עד שיותו לאורו, כלומר שיכין עצמו כל כך להתקרב לו, שיוכל להשתמש לאורו ממקומו ולהכיר בין מטבע למטבע. אף על פי שלא נשתמש, וזהו הקורא בגמרא יותו ממש. Right? If you weren't convinced in Rashi, that's why I covered the Meiri before, so that you'll say, you're reading too deeply into Rashi, come on. And they say, well, the Meiri does explain the Gemara just like that, right? The Meiri says, you never have to use the fire. The machloket is only, do you need to be appreciating it from afar, or do you have to be near in a way that is near enough to actually benefit out of the fire, right? To actually use the fire. But you actually need to use the fire? That there's no such shita, right? None of the opinions in the Gemara say that you actually have to use the fire, right? That's again Rashi and the Meiri, presumably following the same concept as the Rosh and the Ramban. It's a Birkat Shevach. So the question is, do I stand across from it and appreciate it, or do I have to be in a place where I could enjoy it? But this isn't an issue of actual gaining benefit out of it. It's not Birkat Nehenin. There's no reason to think that. Shulchan Aruch says this as well. Ein mevachin el haner ad sheyotu leoro, דהיינו שיהיה סמוך לו בכדי שיוכל להכיר במטבע מדינה זו למטבע מדינה אחרת. That you can, right? Let's see just a summary of the later poskim. פסקי תשובות, ניגי אלמה לברך בורא מאורי האש, אפילו כשיש אור חזק בחדר ממאור החשמל, ונר ההבדלה הוא בבחינת שרגא בתיארא מאי ההנה. Where is שרגא? מכל מקום, כיוון שעומד קרוב לנר, באופן שאילולא אור החשמל, היה יכול ליהנות מאור הנר, להכיר ולהבדיל בין ציפורן לבשר, שפר דמי. So this has a very important ramification for our world, the hotel lobby I was mentioning before. Because all I need to do is I need to appreciate the ability to use this fire that I created just now. That's all I need to do. Now, if I'm close enough to the fire, then I could enjoy it, but I don't. Now, why not? Because I don't have the meluzma of Tveria or meluzma of Tzipori. And even if I have them, I probably wouldn't be able to distinguish between the two. But I'm not checking my coins now. I'm not checking my nails now either. I'm just standing close enough to appreciate. Yeah, well, Hashem. Yeah, I could use this fire if I wanted to. Now, what happens if I can't because there's light in the room? So here you could argue, and some have argued, that the fire now is not useful. It can't be used because something is in the way, something is blocking it. There's no difference between blocking it by having a physical thing blocking, or, right, and you can't use it, or by having more light make you unable to distinguish and appreciate the new fire. But the Piskei Teshuvot brings a whole bunch of poskim there who say you have to be close enough to enjoy that fire, and that has to do with the quality of the fire and where you're standing. If all the lights went out, now you'd be able to enjoy this fire, and that's good enough. But the later poskim, but most poskim, the mainstream poskim, so this is useful when you're in a hotel, when you're in that kind of setting. You should stand close enough that you could enjoy the fire, but you don't actually have to, the whole putting your fingers up, etc. It's a very old minhag. Actually surprised. I didn't bring that minhag. I thought I brought it. I see it's not here. When I looked over the page before, I noticed it was missing. I'll owe you one. Okay, I'll owe you that. Where's this minhag of looking at your nails come from? But the Shema Shakil Chatar, with the Ephraim, they say you should turn the light off anyway for that reason. Says Shema Shakil Chatar, מנו עומד קרוב לנר, דעיקר הנאתו עם מאור החשמל שבחדר, לכתחילה יקפיד לכבותו, כדי שיוכל ליהנות מנר ההבדלה, או יכוון לא לצאת ברכת הנר של המבדיל, ואחרי גמר ברכת המבדיל יברך לעצמו על נר ההבדלה ויהנה מן האור. And there with the Ephraim, לכאורה איזה הנאה יש מהדלקת הנר, היש אור חשמל בבית, ואולי משום כך יותר טוב לכבות החשמל אז ויהנה. נהג ותיקין לכבות האור שהחדר חשוך, באור הבדלה המאיר ואז לברך. So I think the machloket here between these late poskim is, the machloket between these late poskim follows the same idea I said before, right? Is the idea you need to be in a place where you need to be in a situation in which you could potentially enjoy the fire. The interesting thing as we see, right, we've pivoted. No one says you actually need to enjoy the fire. None of the posts can say that, right? They all agree you have to have potential. Now define potential, right? The Shamsar Kechatari, but the Ephraim, they say you have to potentially be able to enjoy the fire, so the light has to be out. If the light is on, you don't really have the potential of enjoying the fire because the light's in the way. The Piskei Teshuvot says, it's not the light is in the way, it's that there's too much light. Can that really be a problem? And that seems to be the machloket about that, but everyone agrees, right? Once we saw Rashi and the Meiri and the Shulchan Aruch, right? That just taking it back to here, because I think it's an interesting idea, right? That interesting mailach here. The Kolba would explain that the Mishnah said you have to enjoy the fire. Why? Because of Birkat Ne'anin. Then Rav says, no, it's not really Birkat Ne'anin. You have to be able to use it. It's a din in what it's a criteria in what kind of fire you need. And Rav says, no, you need to actually enjoy it, right? And then the Kolbo says, well, we hold like Rava, you have to actually enjoy it, which means the Birkat Ne'anin. So we're back to Birkat Ne'anin. But most poskim, following the Rosh and the Ramban's lead, the Rashi and Meiri say, no, Mapito, this isn't true. You don't need to enjoy the fire. You need fire that has potential, and you need to be in a place that you have potential to use. And then you say, okay, when I say potential to enjoy the fire, what do you mean? You mean if the lights now go out, I'll be able to use the fire? Or do you mean, no, actual potential of using the fire if I take a coin out of my pocket right now? And that's the only machloket left in the late poskim, right? The machloket of is it Birkat Shah or Birkat Ne'anin based on the Kolbo against the Ramban and the Rosh, that's basically gone.